Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss recent High Court case which pronounced that the government unlawfully appointed serial failure and occasional horse rider Dido Harding to the role of overseeing our £37 billion failure of a track and trace system. And in related news, the government look like they may be pulling something similar with net zero plans as well. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So first of all, some relevant facts about our COVID track and trace that were known before this court case. The first is that we had a system in place, one that worked. As the coronavirus was sweeping the world, we had a system established and it was run by the NHS and it was all fine. When people developed COVID, they were isolated, their contacts chased up to also isolate. It did what you'd expect the system to do. Then Boris Johnson decided that if we just lowered our defences, it would sweep through the population and we'd all become immune. We would then point and laugh at the rest of the world for taking precautions against a deadly pandemic. The fools. Only there was a small flaw in the plan. So we ended up in a lockdown that might have been avoided if we had a government that took advantage of our twin benefits. One, we're an island. Unlike a lot of other countries that suffered badly, we're an island. We can easily control who comes and who goes, test them as necessary. Second, we had access to some impressive scientific advice. But no, in the most serious healthcare crisis for a century, we put an Etonian with a shaky grasp of reality in charge of the situation. But Tories don't like lockdowns. Fair enough. But they also don't like doing the things that avoid lockdowns. Well, this is more of a problem. However, they were prepared to go back to track and trace. Only it was trickier now because we'd let the infection run riot. It's a little bit like opening up the castle gates to let the invaders in, then suddenly decided actually we should shut the gates, we shouldn't have done that. A little bit tricky now. You can't just shut the gates and that's that. But rather than get the NHS to run their successful version again, Johnson decided, no, the private sector should sort this out. He provided a budget of £37 billion, which was astronomically higher than other countries whose version worked. How much they spent. You may imagine yourself, well, I don't really know how much it would cost. It did not cost other countries that much and theirs worked. He also put Dido Harding in charge, a former jockey with a history of failure in the business world. Now, you might imagine, given that it didn't work at all, that maybe that was always part of the plan. But it may also just been usual cronyism. Her husband was privately educated and close to Boris Johnson. The government have claimed, in defence of the case, that they rapidly built up a world-leading testing infrastructure, saving a lot of lives. So their defence is, OK, we may not have followed all the right procedures, but, we had this emergency, we dealt with it quickly, and actually, do you know what? We've been vindicated by the results. But this is not remotely true. It took a very long time to build up our capacity, a very long time. And when it comes to Harding's role, her track and trace system was a disaster. It was so bad that a parliamentary investigation found that it didn't help at all. Not just that it wasn't good enough for the money, not even that it wasn't as good as it should have been, or just it wasn't the best value for public money. No, it didn't actually help at all. It's like if we hadn't had it, nothing would have changed. If we'd have just kept the £37 billion, nothing would have changed. All that money on nothing. So the government cannot claim that it saved lives when Parliament has concluded that it did nothing of benefit at all. And now senior judges have said the government acted unlawfully in appointing Harding in the first place. Her appointment breached equality rules. Now, I note from one report on this that the government are saying the court had thrown out the claims. No, there was one aspect of the claim that was thrown out, but not because of a lack of evidence, but because a time limit on bringing the case had been exceeded, so the judges just couldn't listen to it. But it is worth noting that the judges aren't necessarily saying that Harding couldn't have been appointed to the role. This isn't like, the VIP lane, something that just on no level should have ever happened. What they're saying is that the proper procedures weren't followed. That if they'd followed the proper procedures, they probably could have appointed her anyway. And it's this, even though it would have still been unsuitable, but it wouldn't have been unlawful. And it's this lack of proper procedures which concerns me with the latest semi-related issue, because the Dido Harding appointments in the past now, we should learn lessons to try and avoid it happening in the future. That's what it's about. Now, the government seems to have budgeted £140 billion for net zero plans. Now, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with this. Maybe even shows that they're taking it seriously, despite the obvious fact that a lot of very influential Tories and Tory donors are shilling for oil companies, basically, and do not want net zero to be pursued. In fact, there's a large net zero group of Tory MPs whose job it is to make sure that we do not pursue net zero. So then you look back at track and trace and you think £37 billion budget, and it failed completely. It's a reminder that just because the government invests a lot of money in something doesn't mean that we will get what the money is intended for. You know, because the government like to do that a lot. Certainly Boris Johnson, oh, we've put this much money into this and this much money into this. And it's like, yeah, but what benefit did we get from that money? Have you spent the money wisely? That's the key. In the case of track and trace, it was just a way of funneling public money into private hands. That's all it served the purpose of. Didn't do anything good for us. So now you look at this plan to spend £140 billion to achieve net zero, and you can be a bit critical. So how do we know that in 2030, with net zero still not achieved, Parliament will not conclude that this £140 billion ended up doing nothing at all to help, just as with track and trace? So then on to a recent story of the government giving half of this budget to a company in Cornwall. Now, there are two aspects to this company that have raised eyebrows. The first is that it has net assets worth less than £350,000. This is not a large company. This is not even a medium-sized company. £350,000 assets. How does a company with assets way under £500,000 get a contract for £70 billion? Even given that its role is coordinating the budget amongst other companies, we're not suggesting this company is going to get the £70 billion. But that's a hell of an eyebrow raiser. You know, how could such a company even manage a portfolio of £70 billion? But you think, well, maybe it's just really good at logistics, and it's not like anywhere near £70 billion is going to be passing personally through their hands. I would argue, though, that if you need a middleman, because that's what these are, if they're just funneling money from A to B, it's a middleman. If you want a middle, that's what the civil service is supposed to be. You use a government department to do that. Why pay a private company to do what the civil service can do better and cheaper? But these are Tories we're talking about. The private sector is their answer to everything, so no point wasting my breath. That part of it won't even be illegal. But second, even if you take Tory philosophy into account that everything must be done through the private sector, and you accept that they are going to give this money to the private sector in some form, is this small company suitable? The company is reported to be an educational provider. They develop applications for schools. They may well be very good at it, I don't know. But are they really the people to mastermind a strategy for achieving net zero, as well as deciding how half of the £140 billion budget should be allocated in order to achieve it? Now, I will say that these two features do not in themselves make them totally unsuitable. They may actually do really well in the role. It's a little bit after the Dido Harding fiasco. The government appointed someone again from the private sector to manage our vaccine rollout. There were a couple of missteps, but she by and large did well. You know, they don't always get useless people in the role. And you remember, you know, I mean, slightly out of context, Peter Jackson didn't really have experience of big budget films before he was given the biggest of all Lord of the Rings, and he smashed it out of the park. But my concerns are the following. First, the government have a history of allocating impressive sounding budgets to convince people that they're taking an important issue seriously, only to deliver no benefits for that money. Second, we know that a lot of Tory MPs are dead against net zero. They're not against wasting public money, however, so they will be fine with the government sounding good on environmental issues by just saying, well, we've spent this money on it, as long as it doesn't harm their oil company paymasters. Now, this bit gives me a little bit of hope we may get some benefit as opposed to the none at all from track and trace. I don't think the establishment actively want to destroy our environment. They just prioritise their own profits above it, I think. So any moves to decarbonise that don't hit production or consumption of fossil fuels are not likely to be opposed. It won't be enough, of course, but it may at least mean that something is started by the time a serious government comes to power and can start taking it much more seriously. Third, we know that the government do not appoint people or allocate funds according to best use of public money. This is what was clear in the recent High Court judgment and has come across in other High Court judgments as well. This means that even if the government do expect a return on their investment, they still prioritise making sure friends and donors are in on the action. It also means that when the contracted goods or services are not delivered, the government are much less likely to claw the money back as they should. This is because the money was primarily a reward for donating to the Tory party. So this allocation of £70 billion to a small company may turn out to be a really good decision. Who knows? It's just that there would be reasonable questions to be asked at any time, but against the background of what the Tories have been doing with large sums of taxpayer-funded contracts in recent years, I would say there will be a lot of very urgent questions to be asked. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.